The clang of metal echoed through the small auto shop as Jake wiped the grease from his hands and leaned over the workbench. He was tired, the kind of tired that came from years of working 12-hour shifts under flickering fluorescent lights for a boss who cared more about money than people. But despite the exhaustion, Jake's eyes still held a spark, that quiet, stubborn light of a man who took pride in his craft. It was late afternoon when the old lady rolled into the shop. Her name was Mrs. Collins, a frail woman in her 70s, with silver hair tucked neatly under a faded hat. Her wheelchair creaked with every movement, one wheel barely turning as she struggled to push herself inside. "Excuse me, young man," she said softly, "I was told you fix just about anything with wheels." Jake smiled, wiping his hands on a rag. "That's the rumor. What seems to be the trouble?" She gestured to her chair. "It's my old friend here. The left wheel keeps locking up. I can't afford a new one, and no one else in town will look at it." Jake crouched down and examined the chair. The bearings were shot, the axle bent, a 5-minute job if you knew what you were doing. He could fix it easily. But his boss, Mr. Halverson, had made it very clear, "We don't do free work. Not for anyone." Jake glanced at the woman's trembling hands, the way she tried to hide her embarrassment. She reminded him of his late mother, proud, independent, but living on a small pension that never stretched far enough. He couldn't turn her away. "Give me a few minutes," Jake said quietly. "I'll see what I can do." She tried to protest, but he waved her off and got to work. Within minutes, the wheel was off, the bearings replaced with spares from his own toolbox, and the axle straightened. When he spun the wheel, it glided smoothly, like new. Mrs. Collins' face lit up with genuine gratitude. "How much do I owe you?" Jake shook his head. "Nothing. Just promise me you'll stay off rough sidewalks for a few days." She smiled through watery eyes. "You're a good man, Jake." "Thank you." He helped her back into the chair and watched as she rolled away, waving as she left. For Jake, that moment, that smile, was payment enough. But he didn't know that his boss had been watching from the office window. Mr. Halverson stormed out the second Mrs. Collins disappeared from sight. His face was red, his tie half loosened, his voice like a whip. "Jake! What the hell was that?" Jake straightened. She needed help. "I fixed her chair." "It didn't take long." Halverson's eyes bulged. "You used shop parts, my parts, on that thing? Do you know how much those cost?" Jake sighed. "They were just spare bearings, Halverson. Probably worth $5 total." "That's not the point." Halverson snapped, slamming his clipboard onto the counter. "We're not a charity. You don't get to decide who gets free labor. You work for me, and I decide what gets fixed and what doesn't." Jake clenched his fists, biting back his words. She couldn't afford it. "You'd really turn away someone who can't pay?" "Yes," Halverson barked. "Because that's business. And if you can't follow the rules, maybe you don't belong here." The room went quiet. The other mechanics looked up from their stations, tools frozen midair. Jake exhaled slowly and nodded. "If helping people means I don't belong, then maybe you're right." Halverson's face twisted into a sneer. "Then you're fired. Get your stuff and get out." Jake didn't argue. He walked to his locker, gathered his few belongings, a pair of gloves, some old wrenches, and a photo of his daughter, and left. The others watched him go in silence, some shaking their heads in quiet disbelief. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in orange and pink streaks. Jake stood by his old pickup truck, looking back at the shop one last time. He felt a mix of anger and sadness, but not regret. He'd done the right thing, and somehow, deep down, he knew it would matter. As he drove home down the quiet backroads, the radio humming softly, Jake couldn't shake the image of Mrs. Collins' grateful smile. What he didn't know was that the small act of kindness he'd shown that day was about to change his life in a way he never could have imagined. Because by sunrise the next morning, 7 black SUVs would be lined up in front of his house, and every neighbor on the street would be peeking through their curtains, wondering what kind of man had just gotten the attention of people that powerful. The sun had barely risen when the sound of engines shattered the early morning quiet. Jake stirred awake on his worn-out couch, the blanket half draped over him. He blinked groggily, thinking the noise was from garbage trucks. But then he heard it again, low, synchronized rumbles that didn't sound like any ordinary vehicles. He stood, rubbed his eyes, and peeked through the curtain. His heart skipped a beat. 7 black SUVs lined up across his gravel driveway, their tinted windows gleaming under the morning light. Jake's first thought was police. Then, FBI. But there were no flashing lights, no sirens. Just men in dark suits stepping out of each vehicle with quiet precision. Every movement was measured, professional. They weren't here by mistake. Jake's pulse quickened. He looked around his small living room, cluttered with tools, a coffee mug, and the old photo of his daughter, wondering what in the world he could have done to attract this kind of attention. A firm knock echoed through the house. "Mr. Lawson," a voice called out, calm but authoritative. Jake hesitated, then cracked the door open. Standing before him was a tall man in a black suit, an earpiece in his right ear, and an expression that gave nothing away. "Yes?" Jake asked cautiously. The man nodded politely. "Sir, we represent the Collins family. Mrs. Evelyn Collins, to be specific." Jake frowned. "Mrs. Collins? The lady with the wheelchair?" "Yes, sir." The man's tone softened slightly. "She's asked to meet with you. Immediately." Jake blinked in confusion. "Meet with me? Why?" The man simply gestured to the SUVs. "If you'd please come with us, sir." She insisted it's important. Jake hesitated, his instincts telling him to refuse. But something about the man's demeanor wasn't threatening, just formal, disciplined. So, he grabbed his jacket and followed. Inside the SUV, the seats were leather, the air cool and scented faintly of cedar. They drove in silence, the convoy gliding through town, past neighborhoods, and into the countryside. Jake's mind raced the entire time. He couldn't shake the feeling that this had something to do with fixing that wheelchair. But how? Mrs. Collins had seemed like an ordinary elderly woman. Maybe her son was rich and didn't appreciate strangers meddling with her things? Or maybe she'd had an accident, and he was somehow to blame? After nearly 30 minutes, the convoy turned down a long private road lined with oak trees and stone lanterns. At the end stood a massive estate, the kind Jake had only ever seen in magazines. Marble fountains, manicured lawns, and tall iron gates that opened automatically as they approached. "Where are we?" Jake whispered. The driver finally spoke. "This is the Collins residence." They parked near the grand entrance. A butler appeared immediately, ushering Jake through double doors into a sunlit hall. Everything was immaculate, paintings on the walls, chandeliers overhead, the faint scent of fresh flowers in the air. Then he saw her. Mrs. Collins sat near the window, her repaired wheelchair gleaming in the morning light. She looked healthier, more radiant than before. But now, she wasn't dressed in the modest clothes of a struggling woman. She wore a pearl necklace and a tailored dress, the unmistakable look of wealth and grace. Jake stopped in his tracks. "Mrs. Collins?" She smiled warmly. "Mr. Lawson. I was hoping you'd come." He glanced around, still trying to process everything. "I don't understand. You said you couldn't afford repairs." Mrs. Collins